Okay, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Rabbi Mendel Kaplan on the eve of this memorable Shabbos. Good morning, Rabbi Kaplan. How are you today?
Good morning, Martin. And a guten Erev Shabbos, as we say. And as you mentioned, the eve of this memorable Shabbos, Shabbat, Parshat Zachor. Although we talked about this a couple of days ago, perhaps it's good to refresh everyone's memory as to why this is a memorable Shabbat. And first and foremost, on a practical level, what's expected of us on this Shabbat of memory. The Gemara in Masechet Bava Kama, on page 82, talks about the injunctions of one of the greatest rabbis of all time. Some consider him to be a second Moses. His name was Ezra. He was a scribe, known as Ezra HaSofer. Ezra was the one who leads us back into the land of Israel. This is after the miracle of Purim. And we, the Jewish people, become the only nation ever in history to have been exiled from a homeland. It's worth mentioning that the first time around, we lived in Israel as a nation for nearly 1,000 years, almost 900 years to be precise. But then we were exiled. And historically, many, many nations lived, developed, built, and were later conquered and exiled, and simply faded out of existence. The museums are full of relics and remnants of peoples like this. The ancient Greeks, the Phoenicians, the Akkadians, the Sumerians, the Babylonians, and the list goes on. Yet, our history tells the story of a nation exiled and returns 70 years later. And when Ezra brought our people back to the land of Israel, he made a number of important injunctions. And the Gemara says that, to be precise, there were 10. Asara takanot tiken Ezra. 10 ordinances were established. The first that is mentioned is that the Torah be read on Shabbat afternoons, as well as on Monday and Thursday. The Gemara goes on to list a number of other things that Ezra ordained, and then the Gemara asks the simple question, didn't the reading of the Torah on Monday and Thursday predate Ezra by many centuries? As the Gemara says, the concept of reading the Torah in the afternoon was ordained by Ezra Mishum Yeshve Kronos, that literally translates as those who sit idly on street corners. Rashi suggests this is referring to people who are too busy to come to the Beit HaKnesset during the week because their businesses take up the lion's share of their time. However, others like the Meiri and others cited by the Shitu Mikubetzet tell us that Ezra was concerned with people whittling away their time on Shabbat instead of focusing on holy activity. And so he ordained that the Torah be read. People wouldn't come perhaps for mincha, just for services or to pray, but they would come for a Torah reading. But the Gemara says, Sheyu kodim b'sheni v'chamishi, that they would read the Torah on Monday and Thursday. Ezra tiking? This is something that Ezra instituted? Wasn't it not something that predated by many, many centuries? Mikarahu de mitakna. This is something that was instituted from the very beginning of our peoplehood, of our nationhood. The Gemara goes on to say, the Tanya, for we learned in a Braisa is the codicil that accompanies the Mishnah. It is Mishnah grade teaching, a teaching from our sages, and this comes from an exposition on the verse that is found in Exodus 15:22. The Torah there says, Vayelchu shaloshet yamim, when Moses led the people onward from the Reed Sea and Kriyat Yamsuf, they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and there they went for 3 days. 3 days in the wilderness, but there was no water. Lo matzu moyim. Darshe Rishumot Amru, those who interpret the verses metaphorically and euphemistically, to mine them for the deeper meaning and message, teach us that water here is not only physical or literal hydration, but rather this refers to Torah. Ein mayim ela Torah. As Isaiah, the great prophet, says in the beginning of his 55th chapter of prophecies, Hoi, kol tzamai lechula moyim. Those who are thirsty should go and find some water. You don't need a prophet to tell you that if you're thirsty, you should have a drink of water. You do need a prophet to tell you that there are other forms of water and that the thirsts that people experience can only be slaked by virtue of Torah study. And Martin, so many people are living lives in which they feel a thirst, they feel a yearning, they feel a craving for deeper meaning, for mission, for purpose, and that is only to be found, says Yeshayahu, the great Isaiah, within Torah. Back to our point, if there's this idea that they went for 3 days without water, without Torah, then how is this remedied? And the Brisa continues and tells us that as the Jewish people had traveled 3 days without Torah, and as a result they became weary, Nevi'im, Amdu Nevi'im Shebenehem, the prophets amongst them rose, V'tiknu lehem, and they instituted that 3 days should not go by without hearing the Torah be read. So where Torah is read on Shabbat, and then Sunday there's an interruption. The Torah is read on Monday, and then there's an interruption of 2 days, but on Thursday we're taking out the Torah yet again, and the Torah is being read. And in this way, Loi Yolino Shleisha Yomim B'lei Torah, people will not tarry for 3 days without hearing the Torah. So evidently the practice predates Ezra, and the Gemara answers, and the Gemara says that it's true that the concept of reading the Torah does predate Ezra, but originally you would just have one person read 3 verses corresponding to the 3 kinds of Jewish people, Kohen, Levi, and Israel. Alternatively, there were 3 people, one read a verse each. However, Ezra instituted that at a minimum of 10 verses of Torah be read at a time, and this is the practice that all Jewish people, black, blue, green, and in between, follow until this very day. The Rambam Maimonides synopsizes these very words in the 12th chapter of Hilchos Tefillah, and he says, Moshe Rabbeinu tiken lahem liyisrael. It was Moses who instituted the Torah reading for the Jewish people, b'Shabbat, u'b'Sheni, u'b'Chamishi, on Shabbat and Monday and Thursday. Now you might ask the question, and many do, the Gemara says, Nevi'im shebinehem. It was the prophets amongst them. And Rambam says, in fact, it was Moshe Rabbeinu. How does that work? And the Kesef Mishnah gives us a simple answer. It is inconceivable that the prophets amongst them at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu would have done something without the guidance, inspiration, and approbation of Moshe Rabbeinu. So ultimately, this is a rabbinic injunction, and it goes back to the very, very earliest or beginning of rabbis, Moshe Rabbeinu himself. Now, Martin, what does this have to do with our Shabbat of remembrance? Oh, the answer is very simple. There's a mitzvah in the Torah, and this is, in the Rambam system, it's mitzvah 189, the commandment that we would give in Lizkor Eit Asher Asalacha Amalek. We should remember what Amalek did to us at all times. And V'na'orer et hanafashot, we should awaken or stir our essence, our souls, b'dvarim, with words, so that we will wage war against Amalek, so that we will not be, shall we say, laissez-faire, or quiet, or simply ignore the concept of evil, but rather we will stand against evil. And this is the meaning of Zachor Eit Asher Asalacha Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you. And our sages tell us in the Sifri, Zachor Eit Asher Asalacha Amalek is followed later with the words Lo Tishkach, do not forget. And our sages explained, Zachor is bepeh. Remember is to verbalize. Lo Tishkach, that's the remembrance that we keep in our hearts. In other words, in order for us to be sure that we do not forget, it is necessary for us to verbalize. When the Torah tells us, Lo Tishkach, I know we're not allowed to forget. How does one actively remember? And the answer is, Shetehi Shone Beficha, that it's something that should be verbalized or articulated. When the Torah talks to us about this mitzvah, the Torah emphasizes the idea that it be written in the book, the good book, the Torah, of course. And as such, it was understood that in order to fulfill this mitzvah, we shouldn't simply verbalize the verse, but instead, it should be read from the Torah. As the commentary on the Tosfos tells us in Masechet Megillah, on page 17, side B, the Kriyat HaTorah, the reading of the Torah, is rabbinic, with one big exception, and that is on Shabbat Zachor. This is the Oraita. This is Min Torah. This is something that is ruled in the Shulchan Aruch. In fact, even in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, in chapter 282 of the Laws of Shabbat, it says clearly, Parshat Zachor hu chova min haTorah. And the upshot of all of these different sources that I've been citing, Martin, is that it's a mitzvah to be in shul and to hear the Torah read on Shabbat. That's the verbalization we speak of, not simply people mouthing things or saying words, but rather to gather together with your brethren and to hear these words read aloud from the Torah itself. This is a biblical mitzvah. There could therefore be no Shabbat in which it is more important for us to be in shul. And I encourage all of our listeners to find a shul in walking distance and to attend services and to listen to the Torah being read and to remember that there is evil in our world, objective evil that must be not only resisted, but actively stood against. And it is only when we awaken this in our heart by virtue of hearing those words read from the Torah that we can successfully move forward in our journey that leads us through barren wilderness and oftentimes what seems to be an emptiness and a desert, with the knowledge that as we move through Midbar Ha'amim, as we move through the desert-like spiritual conditions of our exile, we are moving into a better time, a time in which Eretz Yisrael Hashlema will unfold in glorious color, a time in which there will be peace for the entire world that emanates from our holy and eternal homeland, Eretz Yisrael, a time in which our world will be awash in God consciousness and we will not have to verbalize things to remember. This, of course, is the age of the cosmic Shabbat, the coming of Mashiach that we hope and yearn and pray for and verbalize all the time, because when you verbalize things, you don't forget. And let me take the opportunity to verbalize and remind all of the Jewish women and girls who are listening to our program or watching online. And if there are no Jewish girls or women in your life, then if you're Jewish and male, you still have an obligation to light Shabbat candles. It's only that when it comes to creating light, the kind of light that brings spirituality, serenity, sanctity, tranquility, and peace, it is Jewish women who are best equipped to do this. Shabbat candle lighting in the GTA on this very important Shabbat of remembrance, Shabbat Zachor, is at 5:56 p.m. And if you're listening from somewhere else, well, go to Chabad.org and find out when candle lighting is in your location. Let's make sure we kindle Shabbat candles on time, ushering in the peace, the serenity, the tranquility, and the remembrance. And let us hope and pray that very speedily, and in our days, evil will finally be destroyed forever. Peace will reign upon God's green earth, and our world will become the gorgeous garden it was always destined to be, B'bias Mashiach Tzidkenu, with the coming of our righteous Mashiach and the ushering in of the prophesied era that we yearn and pray for. May it be b'mheira u'b'yameinu, speedily, and in our days. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi Kaplan, and thank you so much. And we'll speak to you again.
B'ezrat Hashem, we will speak again. Thanks so much for joining. Have a beautiful day, and Shabbat Shalom.